everybody. Welcome to this month's episode of the Female Film Critics panel. And today I have with me film critic from way over in the UK. We have Sarah Buddery here. And thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, we worked out the time differences and we made it.
Yes. So you're from the UK, obviously. And so tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in your love for film and writing about film and all of that. How did that evolve?
Yeah, so I've been writing about film since about 2016. Started off as a lot of people do, just with my own blog, my own website, and kind of writing reviews on there, and then branching out into writing for other sites. And then getting into podcasting quite heavily, which I'm sure we're going to cover. And now I do a little bit of both, mostly podcast stuff, but occasionally dipping my toe into writing as well, and a bit of editing as well. So yeah, it's a lifelong love affair with film. I've loved film for as long as I can remember, but sort of making a semi-career out of it since about 2016. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Do you remember the first film that you saw in theaters, or the one that first made an impact on you?
Oh, it's got to be a Disney film, but I couldn't tell you which. I couldn't tell you which Disney film, because I grew up in the 90s. So not only were there like the Disney films of the 90s coming out, but that was when they were showing a lot of the older films at the cinema again. And I, for the longest time, just thought that all of the really old Disney films, that they all came out in the 90s. Like, when I found out how old Bambi was, it truly blew my mind, because I was just like, what? That came out like last week. I saw it in the theater. So I really, a terrible answer. I don't actually remember the very, very first film that I saw in theaters, but a film that I have loved ever since I was a kid, and has a very special place in my heart, is The Wizard of Oz. This was one of the few films, or sort of like kid-friendly films, that my grandparents had at their house, and it was on VHS back in the day. I believe they'd recorded it off the TV as well, so it's not like they even owned the cassette or anything. And so whenever I was like off sick from school, we'd go to my grandparents and they would look after me, and every single time, like without fail, I would ask to watch The Wizard of Oz from like a very, very young age. And they were like, we've got other things, Sarah, do you want to watch anything else? And every time I was like, nope. Wizard of Oz. And that is a real kind of comfort watch for me now. So that's the first one that I remember like really, really falling in love with. But very strong memories of seeing films like Toy Story and all the sort of like Pixar films of the 90s as well, when I was younger. So yeah, definitely a big Disney kid when I was growing up.
yeah, I love Wizard of Oz as well. It wasn't one that I liked so much when I was younger, but because it was a little scary for me, and I didn't love things that were scary. But I really have grown to it's in my top 10 of like all time. I think it's such a beautiful, hopeful, creative film. So I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Return to Oz was the one that really traumatized me. I was
absolute nightmare fuel.
Yeah, nightmare fuel.
And my husband is like, he'll do this sometimes to annoy me. He'll just be like, oh, you love The Wizard of Oz so much, why don't you like Return to Oz? And I'm like, Martin, it is legit a horror film. I don't care what they want to call it, and it's not the same cast. It doesn't even feel like it's like cut from the same cloth at all. It's just it's actually terrifying.
No,
so
and
I'm with you.
Yeah, and it's so mean. I mean, they literally they have Dorothy strapped down, giving her electroshock therapy, and that's just in the first like 5 minutes. What?
Yeah, I feel like I've like erased all of that film from my memory. I'm just like, it's too traumatizing. Let me just have the happy memories of the real film.
So did you like go to film school, or what was your education background?
Yeah, no, so I didn't study film or anything in sort of further education. I did English literature and language and media studies at college. So that's it gets confusing between UK and US, doesn't it? But that was up until about 18.
Okay.
That I was doing that. But yeah, all I don't want to say self-taught because I've had to learn from other places. But yeah, no, I didn't sort of study film criticism or film studies or anything at school.
I didn't really, I mean, I was political science for my undergrad, and then I got a MBA in business. But it's weird because I always thought that would be a cool job to be a film critic, but it never really occurred to me that could be a reality. I don't know. It was, I don't know. It's not that I didn't think I could do it. I never even questioned if I could do it. You know, it was just like, oh,
yeah.
And so it wasn't until I started a personal blog in like 2008, and every once in a while I would do a review of something. Like I remember I reviewed Frozen and, you know, a few other things like that. But then I wasn't until 2014 that I was laid up with an MCL injury that I was like, well, I need something to do. And I'd always wanted to review the Disney canon. I'd always wanted to watch the whole canon. And so my first website was called 54 Disney Reviews, because that was the idea, was I was just going to review all the way up to Big Hero 6. And then that was it. That's all I was going to do. But then I just enjoyed it so much. And so my SEO was like terrible, because I would just start one thing and name it something, and then start another thing and name it something else. And finally, after once I became on Rotten Tomatoes, I was like, okay, I guess I have to streamline all of this. And so I gave it all, that's when Rachel's Reviews, you know, all kind of got the same name, but it's just been interesting how things have evolved. And like, I didn't expect to be covering Hallmark movies, and then that kind of just happened. And then now I've also been doing these theater reviews. And so that's happened. And it's just kind of let it go where it's supposed to go.
It's funny because I feel like it's not really given as like a viable career option, like when you're doing all the stuff in school, and it's just like, what do you want to be when you're older? Like if you turn around to them and say like, oh, I want to be a film critic, you just have them going, okay, you want to watch films for a living, like that's gonna happen. I mean, because I think
it is hard, it is a tough, I mean, I know almost nobody who does it full time, very few. So I guess I can see their point, but still.
Yeah. I think if I could go back to past me and sort of be like, you know, actually it is and could be an option, I would potentially have sort of like studied further. But at the same time, it can be one of those things where like it doesn't matter if you've studied for it or if you haven't. I know kind of like equal amounts of both kind of in the film criticism world. So it's a lot of hustle to get to making it a viable career option. It doesn't just happen, and I think that you would be in that situation regardless of whether you had studied it or not. So yeah
the only time it really shows that I have not been to film school is certain movies that was like, oh, you all watch that in film school, okay. Like when Jeannie Dallman got #1 for Sight and Sound, I never heard of it. And you know, my friends who went to film school, oh, you watched it in film school. Okay.
Yeah, there's quite a few of those films, isn't there, where it's like it just feels like everyone has seen it apart from you, and you're like, oh, yeah. So they didn't go to film school club.
Are you a fan of Rachel's Reviews? Do you look forward to Family Movie Night, Female Film Critics panels, or the Talking Disney podcast? If so, please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron. As a patron, you get to access monthly events such as the watch-alongs and Q&As, where you get to talk to stars and find out the behind the scenes of the movie making industry. And you can pick what I review for Family Movie Night, or even become a guest on the podcast. Podcasts and YouTube channels are expensive, and I really, really could use your help. I would so appreciate it. You also get to be a member of the Facebook group where we talk about all the films that we're seeing, and we have so much fun. Go to patreon.com/Hallmarkies and select one of the Rachel's fan tiers. That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
So let's talk about Jaws. So did you
Mhm.
watch that in an early age, or was that kind of later? When did you develop your love for Jaws?
Yeah, kind of late, like surprisingly, because a lot of the guests that we speak to on the podcast, they sort of say like, I watched it when I was a kid, traumatized by it, you know, Return to Oz styly, saw it far too young. But I came to Jaws in about, I think it was about 2012, so more than 10 years ago now. But and that was when, I think was when it had the first like Blu-ray release in the UK. And I was kind of like collecting films and going through, like ticking off all those films in lists where it's like, you have to see these films and whatnot. And I loved shark films generally. Sharks are my favorite animal as well. And I'd seen Deep Blue Sea, another great film. And everyone was just like, you got to watch Jaws. Like, if you like Deep Blue Sea, then you'll love Jaws. Jaws is like the shark film. And I was like, all right, okay. Little did they know that Jaws would become my entire personality some 10 years later. Really felt like there's a couple of films, I think, when you watch them where you're just like instantly, so this is one of my favorite films of all time. Like there was no question about it. I watched it for the first time, and then the second, and the third, and then the fourth, and it was like that instant thing about it that I just liked, where I was just like, I love this film. Like it went straight into my kind of top 10, top 5, and it just moved up and up and up until it's number 1, and it will never be replaced. I genuinely believe I don't think I will ever see a film that I love as much as Jaws, which I think is probably quite obvious to people who know me well. But yeah, so that was where it all started, and it's been a wild ride since then.
Yeah. It is one of my favorites as well. I can remember when I first watched it, I think it was in college at some point. I mean, it's a perfect movie for me in a lot of ways because I love the water so much and I love open water swimming. And so if you can make something that I love so much scary, that's like really effective.
Yeah.
And I mean, it didn't stop me from going in the water, but it's definitely, I think, more scary because I love the water so much.
That's really interesting because like there's a distinct sort of like two camps of people who their reactions to Jaws, like they watch it and then they're like, that's terrifying, I will never go in the water again. And then there's the other camp that is just like so fascinated by it that they end up just wanting to like study it or be in the ocean like even more, or having sharks as their favorite animals, or you know, just being a big old nerd about all things like sea related. So it's like you're kind of like, I guess, just like somewhere in the middle of that. It's just like it's terrifying, but you like it.
Yeah. And it'll also hold a special place in my heart because during the pandemic, when only the drive-in theaters here were open, one of them played Jaws. And I think it's like a perfect movie for drive-in because you don't want a movie that has like tons of dialogue, and it has its sections of dialogue, of course, but like it's more about the imagery and the music and everything like that. Because sometimes the sound isn't the best drive-in, but like, I don't know, just the overall aesthetic of it just felt perfect for a drive-in. And because I was so like movie starved in 2020, it definitely it was a special experience to get to see at the drive-in.
Yeah, it's a great film to watch like with a crowd. Like I love Jaws every single time I watch it. It doesn't matter how many hundreds of times it is, but like if I want to get the hit from Jaws, like it's the first time I've watched it, then I watch it I go to the theater to watch it, because you just get you get people reacting to it in different ways. You get people who've never seen it before. And I mean, my absolute favorite thing is to watch it with people who've never seen it before, because then I just get to like experience all of that joy again. I get to be like, oh, your life is about to change and I get to be here to witness it. Like
like I have to say, I think Jurassic Park will always have the edge for me. I think they're pretty similar films, but I think partly because of nostalgia, because that movie was so influential on my love of film. I remember, you know, the first time I saw it, and I saw it like 7 times that summer. And I just every part of it, it still blows me away. I absolutely love all the characters are so great. And I've not liked any of the sequels.
There's still some of the sequels that I haven't seen, but the love for Jurassic Park, I completely understand, and my husband is in the same camp completely. It was the very first film he saw at the cinema, and ignited his love for film. So I feel like if you're that like kind of late 80s period, like if that's when you grew up or when you were born, then that's it hit exactly the right time. I mean, he was I was 81, born in 81, so I was like 13, I think, when it came out. Okay. Well, he was born 86, so he was probably too young to be watching Jurassic Park, but also a young boy, so dinosaurs are just cool.
I'd say like my foundation movies, well, The Little Mermaid is the first movie that I ever really loved, and the music, everything about it, I loved that movie, still do to this day. And then I would say Little Mermaid, and then Clueless was a really foundation movie for me. Jurassic Park, I mean, Clueless came out my freshman year of high school, and it was just like, oh, somebody gets it. This is it. Like, somebody understands.
Like often the film that hold a really special place in your heart, it will hit at exactly the right time, like speak to exactly what you're experiencing at that moment, and that's why it ends up being one that you love so much and continue to love. But
definitely. So how did you get this idea to do this podcast every minute of Jaws? Oh my gosh.
Ridiculous. I as all my best ideas, they tend to come either in the shower or when I'm driving, 2 places where you generally aren't able to like write something down when the idea comes to you. So this particular one, I was driving, and the title came to me first. I've no idea what part of my brain it came from, but I was just like, oh, let's Jaws for a minute. Like that's a cool idea for a podcast. And then I started like breaking that idea down in my head, and I was like, okay, yes, a podcast about Jaws, but what about it? And then I was like, well, it's got minute in the title, and I'm familiar with sort of like other minute by minute breakdown podcasts. Like it's a whole genre of podcasting. So I was like, okay, this could be a thing. And I think I just like just tweeted it out, as you do, put things out into the ether. I was like, idea for a podcast, minute by minute through Jaws, called Let's Jaws for a Minute. And then my co-host MJ slid into the DMs and was just like, do you need a co-host? And I had that moment of being like, should I, like, do I say yes or no, basically? Do I go, no? It was just a kind of like, it was a dumb idea. Just
once you start, about, at least for me, once you start, you got to finish. Like,
right, exactly. Yeah, and I'm a real completist as well. Yeah, like if I start a project, like I've got to see it through. But I was like, I feel like this could work. And we had a bit of back and forth, and I was like, the one thing that I'm lacking in making a podcast is any of the technical side of things. Like if you ask me to edit a podcast, put anything together, not a clue. And he was like, I'm a sound engineer, I do this for a living. And I was like, I just feel like the Jaws gods have brought us together in this perfect way. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. And it came together so quickly after that. I'm a big organizer, love a spreadsheet, so I'm there kind of like breaking the film down. I think it took me about 9 hours of watching the film. That's literally like watching a bit, pausing it, writing down the timestamp and what happened in that bit. So like 9 hours of prep to like break the film down. minute by minute. And then sort of working out schedules and logos and theme songs and all the kind of the fun other things that come into podcasts. But yeah, we brought it together pretty quick, and it just felt like everything fell into place as it should. It's my favorite project I've ever done.
Was that like a pandemic coping project?
Kinda, yeah. We did start it tail end of 2020, I think. So yeah, a lot of podcasts and projects started in the pandemic, didn't they? But yeah, when you've got nothing else to do, make a podcast, right? Yeah. I feel like it would have happened at some point anyway, because I was sort of more regularly podcasting and hosting as well, so getting my confidence in that area. And what better thing to talk about than my favorite film of all time in more detail than anyone has ever required.
Yeah, I had a couple of those pandemic podcasts. I mean, I have a lot of podcasts, but during the pandemic, my friends and I, we did every episode of The Nanny. We recapped, which was, I love that show so much, and that was really fun. And then also over on Hallmarky's podcast, my friend and I started recapping the show Heartland. And it was pretty daunting because now they're just starting on their they just are airing in the US. There's the 16th season. So at the time, I think there were 14 seasons when we started. And so that's pretty daunting. a lot of episodes. but we finally finished. We caught up last August. So it took us over 2 years.
Wow.
To do it every week. but it was a really, fun experience. And it's the connection. I actually ended up doing that with my friend Michelle, who's in Scotland. And that's the coolest part of sort of modern media, is the connections that you can make, and the friendships. And I was thinking about it that as an adult, we've had all this education, we learned all these things, and then you don't get a chance to like use it most of the time, like most of our lives, whatever it is that we're doing, if we have children, don't have children, like whatever it is, like you do sort of the same things every day. Almost all jobs are very repetitive, and that's fine. But like, there's something great about being able to kind of use all of this knowledge that you have, even if it's just about something kind of stupid, and talk to somebody else about it, and let them, and to have a guest and let them also use this knowledge that we all have that we don't get to do anything with.
yeah that's exactly the case in the podcast, because it's pretty well known that Jaws is my favorite film. I think I talk about it enough, even doing a minute by minute breakdown, but I'd always get asked to be a guest on podcasts talking about Jaws, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, because
it's my favorite thing to talk about. But it's also like, I could never go into as much detail as I wanted to, because when you're on a podcast, you have to be a good guest. You have to give other people the chance to speak as well, and you can't sort of spend 4 hours talking about the Indianapolis scene like we did on our podcast. So it's just that, like, being able to have a platform to share my love of my favorite film, but also actually just the wild thing of having people actually listen to it and enjoy it, because most of these things sort of start off as something like, this will be a fun thing for us to do during the pandemic. Like, I think me and MJ were like, it doesn't really matter if no one listens to this, because like, we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. And then when it sort of like took off and people were actually like listening to it and engaging with it, it's just like, okay, people do want to listen to this, and they do like it. And I think that's that's such an incredible thing, like, yes, not the sort of some snarky people who are like, oh, just because you can start a podcast doesn't mean you should. And I agree to the extent that, you know, if you're sort of lacking in the knowledge and the sort of like the basic equipment and that kind of thing, that yes, it's probably not going to be the best listen for other people, but everyone has got that in them, something that they love enough that they could sort of spend an hour, a couple of hours talking about every single week. So
well, yeah, and that's how you tell the difference, though, is the people that are doing to try to like make a lot of money or be famous or I don't even know what really the motivation, but those don't last very long at all. No. I mean, since I've been doing the Hallmarkies podcast, there have been so many that have, because we were one of the first to start in 2017, and there have been so many that have come and gone and come and gone, and people just don't realize how much work it is. And so you got to have a passion for the topic, it's you got to have a love for it, because it's certainly not going to make you a ton of money. You know.
Yeah, biggest myth is that podcasters earn a lot of money. The only podcasters that do earn a lot of money are the ones who are like already famous anyway. So, and then they just get a podcast to get even more money than they already have, but
or they get extremely lucky. Like, I mean, we've been able to like make some income from Hallmarkies podcast, but you know, it's still just a side hustle at best. Yeah, same for us. Like we get a little here and there, but it's not enough to like quit your full-time job and you're right
and live off full-time.
So now you're done. You finished last year with the Minute by Minute, right? Yeah. And so now it looks like you're doing just other Spielberg films. Is that kind of the?
Yeah, we're doing a whole bunch of things. So obviously Jaws is only so long. We would like to hope that it was a never-ending film, but it is just 2 hours and 4 minutes long. So obviously that part of the podcast had like an expiry date. So we sort of sat and thought about what we could do next, about what we could talk about next. And I had the idea to sort of branch off into sort of talking about either other films directed by Spielberg, other films starring kind of the main three actors, other shark films, other films that came out in the same year, the films that were sort of Oscar nominated alongside it. So we've got a whole list of like different topics, and each one is sort of about 10 episodes per season, if you can call it that. So I think, the well may dry up eventually, but we've got a solid 4 or 5 years more of content that we could put out. So that's been a really, really interesting thing, because obviously if you're, podcast is one thing and then it sort of becomes something else, you worry that you're going to lose a lot of like your core listeners and all the rest of it. But people have stuck with it, and I think because we try and keep that conversation about Jaws still, or find those Jaws connections particularly. So yes, we're talking about this other Spielberg film, but we're looking at it in sort of like, oh, that came 2 years after Jaws, or these are the things that Spielberg clearly learned from making Jaws that he then did better the next time around, or just looking at the other. I think particularly when we get onto the shark film season, we'll really clearly see the influence of Jaws in all of those other films, because I maintain that every single other shark film in existence that came out since Jaws has got a reference to Jaws in it somewhere, regardless of how subtle. So that'll be a fun one to explore as well. Lots of different things that we can cover and sort of still keep that title and sort of keep it about Jaws. But have
you done Jurassic Park yet?
It's on so Spielberg has made so many films that we've had to break it up into, I think, 4 seasons. So I think Jurassic Park will be in either season 2 or season 3 of Spielberg. But we sort of steered by the audience as well. So we put out Twitter polls and sort of, we're making the content for people to listen to. So, getting the listeners to vote for like the next season that they want. So we've covered the first part of Spielberg, but we might not necessarily get to the rest of it until sort of further down the line, depending on what it is that people want to listen to. But yeah, it's I'm very much looking forward to getting to Jurassic Park and actually being able to like tick off some of the films. There's not many, but like a handful of Spielberg films I haven't seen. So I'm like, that's exciting, because as a completist, I want to be able to like have that full thing on Letterboxd where it's like, yeah, you've watched all of them.
There's a few I haven't seen. I haven't seen 1492 or some of the older ones, which I saw you'd covered. But I think that'll be a very interesting conversation, because there are similarities between the two movies, and so that'll be a good one. So you had another podcast that's about Disney, right?
Yeah. So I was one of the hosts of Jumpcast, and this was an idea that was sort of born out of the pandemic, because prior to covering Disney, we were sort of doing new releases, films that had come out in the cinema, but they all closed. So we were like, okay, what do we cover now? And I was like, well, I'd had this idea to sort of cover all of the Walt Disney animated classics. That's a pretty long series, so that will tide us, certainly tide us over for however long this pandemic is going to last. Obviously, this, we, at the time we had no idea how long it was going to last, but I was like, this is at the time 50 something episodes that we can put out. So I suggested that, and they sort of went with that, and we're happy to host it. And I got my friend on board who is a huge Disney nerd, more of a Disney nerd than me, I think. So he had a lot of the history elements, and then I had I don't know what I brought to the table, but love of Disney, sheer love of Disney, I think. But yeah, that was a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, I've actually reviewed the Disney canon 3 times. The first time was on my blog, which I had started at my site. And then the second time was on my YouTube channel, individual videos. And then the third time was with my friend Stanford. We did the Talking Disney Classics podcast, which we should definitely have you on for that, because now that we've finished, we've been having content creators come on and share their rankings of the Disney canon, and we have our rankings. And so I've done it. That one was really fun, not only to do it with my friend and to talk about each of these films, but we did it we didn't do chronological. We did the random number generator, picking out which one. So that made it, I think, more fun. And I think that you should do it in chronological order, the first time, but I'd already done it twice. So I think I'd checked off those boxes. And so it was time to do something different. And it was just nice, because you didn't get like stuck in like the tough eras. You had them sprinkled throughout. Was much better.
There's some rough patches. Yeah. We condensed some of the package films and like the wartime stuff. Because some
we
of them
did
are not good,
a couple we did a couple combined episodes, like we did both of the Latin American movies together. We did both of the Rescuers movies together, things like that. We did some combined ones.
It makes, especially when there's like not a whole lot to talk about. I mean, you can always find something, but some of those package films are short, like really short. So
45 minutes, one of them.
Yeah, thank God. I mean, honestly, if it's been any longer. But we went through it chronologically, which, like you said, I think that it's a great way of doing that, sort of like the first, if you're like, I am going to watch the whole like Disney animated canon, you got to do it chronologically, because it's so interesting to see how it sort of like changes over time, like how it goes from Snow White through to whatever we're up to now, Encanto, Strange World. whatever.
Strange World, yeah, that's the last one.
Yeah, and just seeing that, like the huge changes in animation, and you can sort of see the moments where they're like figuring it out as well, where they're sort of experimenting with some CG, some hand drawn, and then you see hand drawn go completely, which I still lament, but you know,
I'm with you.
I honestly, if Disney, I said this to my brother recently, I was like, if Disney turned around and were like, we're going to make an entirely hand drawn film as our next film, like feature film, I would be so happy. Like that would make my day. I just want to see them do it again, just to prove they can.
I would love it too, obviously. But I'm kind of surprised that, there's this I think it's Skydance or whatever, that they did that movie Luck, coming out, and they're working with Brad Bird, and I think that it would be, if I were them, I would suggest making a new Iron Giant movie. I think it would be a huge hit, and it would be so refreshing to see a animated 2D film again like that. And I feel like there's enough kind of nostalgia now for that film that I think it would do really well.
Yeah, I love that film. So sign me up. I am absolutely on board with that. And I feel like you're right. I mean, nostalgia is a very powerful thing, and it seems strange to sort of be thinking about like hand-drawn animated films as, retro or nostalgic or whatever, but they're just not making tons of them anymore, or certainly Disney aren't. So
outside of anime, that's really the last sort of bastion of 2D animation is anime. Someone like Suzume just coming out, or something like that. I really loved, I'm a huge animation fan, and I really loved all of the movies from Tom Moore at Cartoon Saloon, the Wolf Walkers and Song of the Sea and Secret. They were all incredible in my opinion.
I love those films. I've not seen the latest one.
Oh, you haven't seen Wolf Walkers?
No, I've seen Wolf Walkers. There's another dragon.
Yeah,
I can't remember what it's called, but
it's like My Favorite Dragon or something like that. Was fine. It was more for like little kids.
Okay.
Like for kindergartners, little kids. But it was cute. So I really admire that whole studio. I think they haven't had like a real, what I would consider a real miss in all of their films. And I thought that Wolf Walkers should have won the Oscar. I mean, of course Pixar's going to win, but I thought that it was much better than Soul.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's obviously it was Del Toro's Pinocchio that won this year, but I think it's sad, like when you kind of look at the list of nominees and you're like, well, I know which one is gonna win, and quite often Disney has more than one in there. Like there'll be a Disney one and then there'll be a Pixar one as well, and it's like as good as they are. I mean, I think Turning Red was nominated this year, and I really, really like that film. But I'm always quite, as much as I love Disney, seems like strange to say, but I'm always quite glad when they don't win, because I'm like, they've won so many times, and there's some great animation out there that's not Disney. So it's nice to see others get the recognition as well.
Because you'd like to think that people are actually watching the films in the Academy that are voting, but sometimes it's like, are you just picking the ones your kids like the most? Are you actually picking what you think is the best? I don't know.
Yeah.
In your bio that you love reality TV.
Yes, for my sins.
So I'm curious, do you watch Survivor at all?
I don't know. Okay, I don't know if that's made it over to here or not, but
because that's my favorite. I haven't watched actually the last 2 seasons because I've been so busy with the podcast, but I do love the show. I think it is so interesting and entertaining, and they've had over 40 seasons and it still manages to continually kind of reinvent itself, and so that's one that I love. So you said Project Runway was one that you had listed. Do you have a favorite winner?
Oh, I don't. Put me on the spot now.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know. There's been so many.
Yeah.
I can't think.
Yeah.
But I love all those kind of like fashion competition reality things. I just think
I haven't watched it for a while because I've just been so busy. But I think probably Christian Siriano is probably my favorite.
It's the one that he's like, I still see him like crop up on Instagram and stuff, that he's like designed things and still like you hear from the others as well, but I think he's probably the one that's done the best for himself after the show. But yeah.
What are some of your other favorites?
Other favorite shows?
Or reality TV.
I've not watched the later seasons because they've taken them off Netflix, but I do love RuPaul's Drag Race as well. Ashamed to admit, but I like Jersey Shore. I like Jersey Shore. See, I'm like looking away from the camera now. I feel like shouldn't admit that, but yeah, and any of the kind of like really trashy Netflix kind of like competition dating shows, like Love is Blind. What are the other ones? Too Hot to Handle is that one. They're all ridiculous, and I hate myself as I'm watching them, and my husband calls them my shitty TV shows. So he's like, he'll come in the room, he's like, oh, you're watching your shitty TV shows again, and I'm like, look, my life is not very dramatic, so I need the drama.
For me, not necessarily drama, but my kind of like escapist trash TV is or this kind of is probably something involving like more about food, like Top Chef or Beat Bobby Flay. You know, that's kind of my relax show. Just be like, click, let's watch this.
Yeah, has it's called the Great British Bake Off.
Oh yeah,
has that made it to? Made it over there?
Yeah.
I love that show.
Yeah, it's so good. You're like, oh, he shook the person's hand. This is so exciting.
Yeah. And like you find yourself they create these like cakes and like amazing things that I would never be able to make. And then you find yourself like becoming a critic of it, just like I wouldn't have done that with the icing, and it's like I can't do anything with the icing, so I don't know why I'm now suddenly an expert on this.
It's true. That's really true. So you have written a bunch for Looper. How did you looper.com, how did you get connected with them? How did that happen?
Yeah, so that was October. What year are we now? 23,
yeah.
21, I think.
Okay.
So I've been doing that for a little while now, but yeah, I think one of my co-host on the Disney podcast, shout out to Barry, he said that they were looking for writers, and he knew I was sort of looking for something that was a little bit more reliable, shall we say, because I don't love pitching to places. I find it very stressful, and they were sort of looking for people who could just sort of write ad hoc and fit into your schedule. So yeah, I got that and been writing for them for a little while. Recently became an editor for them as well, so doing less writing and more editing, but that's been really, really fun and nice to sort of cover both sides of it, but also just to feel like I'm actually progressing in something to do with film is nice. So sort of like starting off as a writer and then moving into editing has been really fun. But yeah, I love writing all those. Mostly it's a lot of lists, but you can see when I can get and I can sneak in my sneaky little Jaws references or Disney things sometimes.
Yeah, so you do a lot of listicles, and do you come up with them, or do they come to you and say, hey, we want to 12 best Timothée Chalamet performances list?
Yeah, it's a little column A, little column B. So sometimes there'll just be stuff available. So the background people, sort of what people are clicking on and what people are searching for and what people are looking for will be the sort of the topics, and then there'll be ones that you can just kind of pick up and write if it's something that you feel you'll be able to write. But yeah, you can pitch to them as well. So some of my Disney ones that I wrote for them, I think the Bambi one was because it was sort of like a significant anniversary. So I was like, okay, let's see if I can get that one. So I pitched that idea, and So sorry, go on.
No, I want to talk to you about your 98 best drama movies of all time. So this must have been a Herculean task, this one. How many movies would you say you started with before narrowing it down to 98?
On this list, I think it was like pushing 200.
I'm sure.
Because in these sort of mammoth lists, I've done some pretty meaty lists for them. And you always sort of start with like the long list. So I started with my list, and you do source from other places as well. You sort of go on Rotten Tomatoes and filter by drama and that sort of thing, just, you know, because I couldn't name 200 films off the top of my head probably. So just sort of like prompt. Then start off the list from there. And then with these lists, it is sort of partly, you know, I can put them in the order that I want, but there sort of has to be justification for it somewhere else on the internet, if that makes sense. So you kind of look at the Rotten Tomatoes ratings, IMDb ratings, Metacritic, all that sort of thing. So I do like a combined, like weighted score of those ones, and then that obviously helps filter out quite a lot of the ones that just aren't highly rated enough, as much as I might like them or want to include them. And then going from there, and those ones take a fair amount of time to write, because obviously a lot of them I've seen, some of them I haven't. I try to, if I'm putting something on a list, I try to watch at least some of the film, because I feel like you have to, if you're writing like a summary of it or saying why it's great, I feel like it's hard to do that if you haven't seen the film. So it's a lot of work to put something like that together, but very, very fun.
So spoiler alert to people in the article. So you had Godfather as the number one. How did you come up with that? Is your number one?
Yeah, it's pretty cliche, isn't it? Because like so many of these lists have that as the number one. In my true list, it probably wouldn't be my number one, but when every other place on the internet says this is the greatest drama film ever made, you kind of have to go with it. I mean, it is great. I'm not sitting here trying to say that The Godfather isn't a great film, but yeah, there is a little bit of that sort of like weighing sort of my own personal opinions with what the rest of the internet is saying. I mean, you can see like the 12 Angry Men is second, and that's got a higher Rotten Tomatoes score, so that's not the only metric, but yeah, it does factor into it, unfortunately.
I think the Godfather films are very well made. You can't take that away from them. They're a little boring to me. For me to be number one,
they're very long.
They're very long. They're very slow. They're very well done. Good movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's scrolling through my top 10. I mean, if it was purely based on Sarah opinion, I think it would probably be Casablanca that was first. I maybe Citizen Kane.
Of your top 10, for me, would be All About Eve, would be my favorite. I love that movie. It's a perfect script. I actually haven't seen Battleship Potemkin. I haven't seen that.
I watched it for the first time. This is one of these classic like film school people. You say that to a certain group of people and they'll be like, oh no, burn her at the stake, she's never seen it, boo.
Gene Diamond all over again.
Which was me until I wrote this list. And then I watched it, and it's one of those films where you're like, maybe it won't be that great. I've had that with a lot of films. I had that with Casablanca as well, which I had seen before including it on this list. But when people say something is like one of the greatest films of all time, you're like, yeah. We'll see. And then you watch it and you're like, oh yeah.
I with the Jeannie Diamond, I thought I'm lucky that I like watching people cook. I'm entertained by that. And so like a lot of the things that probably other people think are super boring, I'm like, oh, that's fun to watch. I mean, I do not think it is one of the greatest movies ever made. I mean, it's fine. Like I thought it was way too long, and I didn't think it really had anything interesting to say. But I didn't mind watching it. If I was just watching it as like this experimental film from the 70s, like then I'd be like, oh, okay, it was fine. But when you're watching it as like, this is supposedly the greatest film ever made, then you're like, what? So maybe its own hype.
Yeah, it does carry like a bit of pressure when like you're told, especially when you see it like top a list like Sight and Sound list. I also haven't seen it. So
oh, you haven't seen it?
No, okay. I have to give back my film critic card now.
I just saw it for the first time because I have a blind spot series on my blog. Every month I do a movie I haven't seen that's either like a cult classic or critically praised or something. I try to give it some variety so it's not all just like austere art house films. But I actually just reviewed it this month, so I'm not that far behind you.
Okay, good. Phew.
Yeah. And you have the highest like modern movie you have on here is Boyhood at 14. And then you have Portrait of a Lady on Fire. That's the most recent at 18.
Yeah.
So was that hard for you when making this list to kind of figure out how many like modern films to include versus classics?
That was probably the hardest thing, because I think that you hear two very different arguments from the sort of film community. Of some people that say, nothing made in the last however many years could possibly be included on a list like this, and the sort of argument about recency bias and that kind of thing. But it's hard to argue just with a really great film, which I think is why, I felt it was important to include ones like that. And you also sort of have to think about like, who is scrolling through a list like this? Like you do have to put yourself into like audience mentality a little bit as well. If it's someone who has sort of only come into their love of film more recently, they might not have seen a silent film from 1925 or something, but they will have seen, these other films, these more recent films. So it's creating like the little bit of balance in there as well. And, I think, I mean, every film on the list, I believe to be worthy of inclusion. I think that the list, like the ranking of the list, if my order would be potentially quite different if I was sort of going my true feelings.
I'd be interested to see that if you do ever do
I
it
should
on like
do
Letterboxd
or
something.
I'll do that as a Letterboxd list, because that would be fun. It might be quite eye-opening.
Yeah, I'd like to do something. I mean, years ago I did on the channel I did my favorite movies list, and I've done my top 50 animated films. That was like 3 or 4. I think I did it during the pandemic. But it'd be interesting to reassess that and think about that.
We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies merch store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, Hardy, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies merch store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/Hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/Hallmarkies.
All right, well, let's end off talking about what is an unpopular opinion that you had that maybe you got some flack for or that people were surprised.
Oh, I don't know if this is necessarily surprising, but unpopular opinion, or maybe a popular opinion, depending on who you talk to. I think that all of the Disney live action remakes are trash. I don't think there is one good one amongst all of them. And a lot of people don't like that opinion because there's a certain corner of like Disney fandom where they're very, very passionate about everything. Everything that Disney make. It doesn't matter what it is, animated, live action, whatever. So it's like for me, a Disney fan to be like critiquing the live actions is like heresy to some people, but
it's just funny how certain people have made following these corporate entities, these massive multinational corporations, their like religion. I mean, it
very
much
really
so. Is like whether it's DC or Marvel or Disney, that it's just like they want you to have that kind of reaction because that's what's going to make them the money. I mean, I love Disney, but I'm the first one to have. I mean, last year I thought was rough. I wasn't actually a big fan of Turning Red. Lightyear was disappointing. It was bizarre. I don't know what they were doing with that project. It was so weird. And then Strange World was just not great. It was not good. And so I don't know. I just feel like you can't let yourself be tied down by the strange loyalty to a giant corporation. I don't, it's very weird to me. But yeah, I mean, there's been a couple that I don't think that any of them are as good as the originals.
Yeah.
Except for maybe Peach Dragon, because I don't love the original Peach Dragon.
Oh yeah. That's an exception.
Yeah, that's the exception. I mean, it's by far the best. To me, it's not even close. It's so much better than, and that's why I'm looking forward to this Peter Pan and Wendy, because David Lowery, I'm just curious to see what he will do with the Peter Pan story. And I feel like he's managed to be able to keep his voice and his style and his everything while working for Disney, which is really impressive.
Yeah.
And I actually really loved Mary Poppins Returns. I'm not going to say it's better than the original, but I actually really loved that one. But because I mean, it's one of the best movies ever made, the original. But pretty much all the rest I could do. Cinderella, I think, is okay. But yeah, most of them, and this Little Mermaid movie is making me crazy. And I hate the way that it's always framed as we're going to modernize it, because they were so outdated. And I'm like, you have the actress playing Ariel coming out and saying that they're going to, that Ariel's, they're going to modernize Ariel, and that she's not just going to give up her fins for a man. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she literally sings Part of Your World before she even meets Eric in the story. She was heavily invested. You don't have a whole grotto full of stuff like that and it just be this like thing that you're just coming up with because you like a guy. Like, she was heavily invested in the world, and so things like that just make me crazy.
I'm kind of dreading it because my Jaws co-host MJ told me that they'd changed the lyrics to Poor Unfortunate Souls.
It's so ridiculous.
I wanted to flip a table. I'm so mad. Like everything I see about it just makes me me cross. And it's like, you know,
and it makes me mad because we have this whole generation of adults who have been trained by Disney to devalue animation, and that animation is for kids, and that it's not something for, you know, adults to participate in. And it just makes me sad because you have these incredible artists that are putting years of their life into films, and to be treated with such disrespect by Disney is just, it makes me mad. And I mean, I don't know. I just, even Belle, you think Belle is going to be modern enough for these people, but no, even Belle she had to be an inventor of a washing machine for some reason. Like what?
It's this like
Mulan, Pinocchio last year was absolutely atrocious. I was grateful.
So mad.
I was so grateful for Guillermo del Toro because we needed the redemption.
Yeah, it was like cleansing, wasn't it? Like, but I do like Pete's Dragon. I think when I'm thinking of the live action ones that I really hate, it's of the sort of like the Walt Disney animated classics canon, the kind of like ones they've remade of that. I mean, because what they did with Pete's Dragon is take an animated film that wasn't very good, wasn't particularly popular, and make it into something that I think is actually better.
Yeah, I agree.
So it makes more sense to me to sort of take some of those more obscure properties, if you will, and do something different with them, modernize them, give them a sort of like a fresh twist or whatever, if you will. But like shot for shot remaking The Lion King,
oh my god,
with some like uncanny valley, hideous looking creatures that like can't emote, and yet they're trying to get them to sing a song. Like what I don't understand is how these films end up being longer than the source material.
Yeah,
like isn't Little Mermaid,
Little Mermaid's like 50 minutes longer? I'm like, what?
Of what? What are they possibly putting in it to make it that much longer? And those critters look absolutely disgusting. I don't know what they've done to Sebastian, but I'm mad about it. And thing is, like, will I end up watching it because of like morbid curiosity? Sure, but I won't be happy about it, and I won't pay money to do it.
I know. I'm glad I get to go to a screening. Yeah. Well, my unpopular opinion, and it felt like it became less unpopular, but when I put out my best movies of 2022 video and list last year, my number one favorite movie was Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I was totally blown away by that movie, and I think not everybody, but there were a lot of people that were like, what? But then the movie started to kind of grow and build, and people started to see it. And there were a lot more people that I felt like every day there was a new video on YouTube saying like, this is really great. And it was kind of fun to see that happen, and it just kind of build and make more money and be people to realize. I just thought it had I loved all three villains. I loved the animation. I thought it was like so refreshing to have a studio franchise film for a franchise that like we're all kind of tired of, you know, like Shrek, just for it to have it be so good and that they tried so hard. I was super impressed by it. And especially like the first 20 minutes, the animation just blew me away. And so I felt like that was kind of an unpopular. People were like, what? You have that as your number one movie of the year? I'm like, yes, it's great.
I love it when you can like, you can just own your opinion. Like you don't get talked down from it. You don't, have someone like change your mind on it. You're like, no, this is what I believe and I'm sticking with it. I mean, I've still not seen it, which it makes me very sad, but as soon as it's available to stream, I'm keen to watch it.
It's really good. I think it's on, one of the streamers here. I forget, Peacock or Paramount or one of the ones here. So it might be over there hopefully sometime soon. I really just thought it was special. And I just admired them so much because they could have easily just phoned it in, made a basic sequel. Nobody would have thought the less of them. And so for them to try so hard on the animation, so hard on the characters and the story, and to have an actual villain, like, it was scary. We haven't had those in anime films for so long. And so that was very exciting to me. Well, what's something that you've made either on a podcast or in a listicle or something like that you were proud of, that you think was really good?
Ooh, that is a good question. I can't say the entire Let's Jaws for a Minute podcast, can I? Because I'm very proud.
Sure.
I'm very proud of that. I think just the fact that we did it, the fact that we completed the what we said we were going to do, how it all started, how it all came about. I'm so proud of that podcast, like going from a silly little idea I had while I was driving to something that people actually genuinely love and enjoy listening to, and something that sort of feels like it has legs, you know, beyond as well, like can go further and we can do more with. So yeah, it was quite a moment, like when we actually finished it. It was very strange, like a weird void of like, oh, there's no more minutes of Jaws to talk about. But also that feeling of like immense pride of just having had a, you know, pandemic project that we actually saw through to the end, because it didn't happen for everyone. So
it does feel good when you when you finish something like that and you just like created something, and hopefully at the very least, like you said, have this experience with your co-host that you'll never forget. That's how I felt when I finished Heartland. Like
it's like an experience that only, you know, you and your co-host kind of like know about. Like, you've had people come, you know, guests or whatever, come along for the ride, and it's a completely different experience for listeners as well. But the actual like doing it, the making it, all the behind the scenes stuff, the stuff that people don't see, like everything that goes into making those things happen is like it's an experience not everyone gets to have, but it's so rewarding.
Well, something that I'm proud of is, so when the like live theater, I love live theater, Broadway musicals, all of that is a huge passion of mine. And I was devastated when like Broadway had to close for 2 years in the pandemic, and when local theaters also had to close, and that was just devastating for me. And I was really concerned about whether they could bounce back. And so once I got vaccinated, I kind of made it my goal that I was going to support local theater as much as possible. And luckily in Utah, they had kind of started opening up earlier than some other places in the country. So I had that option, I guess. And it was such kismet, because the first show that I saw after getting vaccinated, the first show was Les Miserables, which is my favorite, and was like a huge influence for me growing up and everything. And I love that. The movie is flawed, I understand, but I loved that. I still love that show. And so the fact that the first show that I saw coming out of the pandemic was Les Mis was such kismet, I thought, and amazing. You know, that would be the first one. And so I was going to like to musicals like or plays a couple times a week. And then I found this Utah Theater Bloggers Association, which I'm still writing for, last year. And so I started writing for them and actually get paid, which is really exciting.
Nice.
And I mean, not much, but it's something. So I started writing for them. And then I became a member of the American Theater Critics Association, which was really exciting. And so just this week, I have finally finished my Rachel's Reviews Theater blog website, where I'm going to be having all my theater reviews and everything on there. And I'm so proud of it. I think it looks really nice. And I'm just excited to kind of take this next step, because I was just having a few reviews on my personal blog. And so now I have an actual Rachel's Reviews Theater website / blog. And I just am really excited for this new kind of journey that I never thought that just sort of my passion for supporting local theater would actually like lead to becoming an actual theater critic, but that's kind of how it's evolved. And I'm very excited about it. So that's my thing.
It's the best thing. Like when something you're passionate about can actually be something that you get to do and get paid for it. It's like, it's the dream.
Yeah. So there we go. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking with me. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed getting to meet you. And if people want to follow you, your content, what's the best way to do that?
You can probably follow me on Twitter is the best thing to do. At Sarah Buddery, and there occasions that I write stuff. I'll send the links out, and when we're back to podcasting regularly as well, will be where I share the episodes as well, or just cute pictures of my dog in the meantime. So.
Yeah, your dog is really cute, Thelma.
Yeah, she's so cute. Which a movie themed name, but not the movie you might think.
Oh, okay. Well, you can follow me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. Check that out. Also, if you're listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. That really helps me out. And you can find me on Hallmarkies Podcast as well. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Appreciate that so much. Also have the Patreon group and merch stores. Check out that. And thanks again, Sarah. It was so great to meet you. And we'll talk to you all later. Bye.